Namaste and good morning, everyone. Let's do some prayers before our class. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Bhurбхавасвah Tatsavitra Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat Asto Ma Sadgamya Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya Mrityurma Amritam Gamya Om Sahnavavtu Sahnavunaktu Saviryam Karvavai Tejasvi Navadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavai Om Shanti 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 Om. When we study Vedic scriptures, there are certain terms. If you don't know the meaning of those terms, it becomes very confusing for us to go further. Like Chaitanya, Chetana, Gyata, Sakshi, Safurati. Or English, when we say consciousness. What is consciousness? What is the difference between pure consciousness, Chaitanya, and Chetana? What is the relationship between thoughts and consciousness? When somebody says consciousness is unchanging, how do we know if consciousness is really unchanging? What is the witness consciousness? And there's another term which often comes, a reflected consciousness. What is that? These questions or these terms are about Atma. The nature of Atma, your true self, which is also called Sat Chit Anand, eternal, limitless consciousness. Many scriptures describe Atma as the inner divinity that dwells within us all, or even as the presence of Krishna, Ram, or some other form of God residing in your heart. So precise philosophical term to describe Atma as Sat Chit Anand means pure consciousness. The consciousness that makes you aware of everything. And it's happening right now. For example, you are aware of the image of me on the screen and the sound of my voice. You are also aware of your own thoughts, emotions, or even any memories, what happened yesterday or the last week, which arise in your mind. So fundamentally speaking, you are a conscious being who is aware of whatever you happen to experience. For this reason, consciousness is indeed your essential nature. Or you can say your true self. So in the expression, Sat Chit Anand, Sat means existence. Whose existence? Your existence. Your existence as a conscious being. That is a Sat. We all know that our existence is anything but ordinary. The rishis of the ancient India discovered that Atma is actually unborn, uncreated, eternal, and unchanging. That's who we are. That means your true self, Atma, is not subject to aging, illness, or death. That's why it's called the divinity that dwells within you. The rishis also described Atma as being Anand. Over here, remember the word Anand doesn't really mean bliss as it's often translated. Because this Anand is referred to the Atma. Atma, which is the experiencer of bliss, the conscious being who is aware of blissful experience. So in this context, Anand is better translated as perfect, fullness, wholeness, or completeness. Traditional scholars often add the word Anant also to the expression of Satchit Anand. Anant means limitless, infinitely vast, that which is all pervasive. So Atma, the true self, is your essential nature as eternal, limitless, pure consciousness. So in other words, when we use the word consciousness, we are saying Atma. But to simply understand the meaning of these words is not the goal here. Conceptual knowledge that Atma happens to be Satchitanand is merely information. And we all know accumulating more information will never result in enlightenment, no matter how profound that information might be. On the other hand, the teachings of yoga can lead you through a life-changing process of self-inquiry. With the guidance, you can retrace the footsteps of ancient yogis, ancient rishis, and personally discover what they discovered. That means that you can directly recognize or realize your true inner nature as Sat Chit Anand. And what is Chaitanya? Chaitanya is just another word for Chit, consciousness. Chit and Chaitanya are synonyms, just like their English equivalents, consciousness, awareness. All these words, they mean the same. But on the other hand, Chetana means different though. Chetana used to denote sentience. That's the Chetana. Sentience is your ability to perceive or experience. That's Chetana. Chetana makes us aware of the world around us. So Chetana is the faculty of your body and mind, which enables you to see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. Another point I would like to make here, that medical science doesn't generally differentiate sentience and consciousness. Both of these words are used to refer to a patient's ability to respond to external stimuli. Stimuli like familiar faces or questions asked by doctors. A patient who is completely unresponsive to all such stimuli is said to be unconscious. This medical finding can lead to lots of confusion because the medical and the Vedic definitions of consciousness are completely different. Doctors define consciousness in terms of a patient's behavior, whereas Vedic teachings define consciousness in terms of a person's inner experience. When a patient is completely unresponsive, doctors really don't know what the patient actually happens to experience in that condition. Even if they measure the parent's brain activity, the powerful medical instruments they can use, those instruments cannot reveal anything about the patient's own inner experience. That personal experience is said to be private. It is completely inaccessible to anyone else. So according to the Vedic philosophy, it's impossible to observe or measure consciousness. Like you can measure your blood pressure, you can measure your pulse rate or brain activity, but consciousness you cannot measure. Consciousness is not a physical phenomena that can be detected or quantified. For this reason, even when a patient is diagnosed as being brain dead, that diagnosis says nothing about the consciousness as understood in the Vedas. So then what happens to consciousness at the time of death? From the Vedic standpoint, the answer is nothing. Nothing at all. Since consciousness is eternal, unchanging, fundamental reality, it remains utterly unaffected by death. You might wonder, for patients who are brain dead or in a deep coma, what do they experience? The answer again is nothing. To experience anything at all, you need a working mind. When the mind stops working due to brain death or coma, then for that patient, all experience comes to an end, but at the same time, consciousness persists. Nothing has happened to the consciousness. Just like you can be conscious of an experience, you can also be conscious of the absence of an experience. For example, if you stand in a perfectly dark room, or a small room, you can call it a closet, with your eyes wide open, what do you see? Nothing. You can see, but there is nothing to be seen. In the same way, in the absence of a working mind, you remain conscious, but there's nothing to be conscious of. Properly understood, consciousness is not some kind of a power or faculty. Remember that, which you happen to possess. Because a faculty is something you can lose. If you lose your ability to see, to hear, or to walk, you still exist as a conscious being. But in the absence of consciousness itself, you would have no existence at all. So consciousness is the essence of who you are. You don't have consciousness You are consciousness. There's a huge difference in there. You don't have consciousness, you are consciousness. And then what is the relationship between the thoughts and the consciousness? Because constantly there are thoughts going in our mind. Thoughts are just mental objects. In Sanskrit, they are called vrittis. Those vrittis are illumined or revealed by consciousness, by you, the conscious being. Just like the sun reveals the presence of objects by illumining them, the so-called light of consciousness reveals or illumines mental objects in your mind. It's like a metaphor. This metaphor also shows something else that's extremely important. The sun doesn't get affected by whatever it happens to illumine. There could be a crime going on the street, or there could be some kind of a selfless service is being done by somebody. Sun does not get affected at all. Sun can shine on a sacred temple or on a pile of stinking trash. The sun remains unchanged. In the same way, consciousness isn't affected by whatever mental object it happens to reveal. When consciousness illumines happiness or sadness in your mind, it remains unchanged. Happiness or sadness are vrittis. Vrittis. In Yoga Darshan, we learned that word, vrittis, which are constantly changing mental objects. But the consciousness that reveals them is ever unchanging. That's why it's called eternal, or a fundamental reality. No doubt, consciousness seems to get affected by happiness, sadness, and other feelings. But in reality, consciousness remains perfectly untainted. In the presence of sadness, it's almost like if you have a crystal, clear crystal, you put it in front of a colored cloth. When you look at the crystal, you might see the colored crystal, but actually it's not colored. It's still clear. So the sun metaphor is often used in the teachings of Vedas. But like all metaphors, it is not perfect. Because metaphors, at best, are merely pointers or approximations. The problem with the metaphor is that it creates a division or duality between thoughts and the consciousness that reveals them. And ultimately, the Vedic philosophy rejects this duality or any kind of a division between the subject and object, or between revealer and revealed. So to resolve this apparent duality, the Vedic rishis, they use the sun metaphor, and then after that they discard it also. They substitute with another metaphor in its place. Actually, this is a very unique and powerful method of teaching by the Vedic rishis. It's often compared to using stepping stones to cross a stream. You have to leave the previous stone behind when you step onto the next one. So you use one example, understand it to that level, then move forward. So in this way, we have to leave the sun metaphor behind so that we can move on to the more refined explanation. And the metaphor which describes further is based upon the pot, the clay pot. The pot is nothing but clay. If it weighs 3 ounces, all that weight is due to clay. The pot adds nothing. Pot is said to be Naam and Roop, mere name and form. When this particular name and form will get associated with the clay, we will call it a pot. When it gets associated with some other form, we change the name. And in your mind, when names and forms get associated with consciousness, we call them vrittis, mental objects. Let me explain now. In your mind right now is an image of thought of this part which I'm talking about. We can call it a part thought or a part vritti. The pot is made out of clay. So we can ask, what is the pot vritti in your mind made of? It's made of consciousness. Like the pot is a form of clay, the pot thought in your mind is a form of consciousness. Because consciousness is the one which is making it. And when that pot thought is present in consciousness, you experience the pot. The same is true for the image of my body and the sound of my voice. Both are present in your mind right now as vrittis. These vrittis are different than a part vritti, but they are made of the same consciousness. The reason for using this alternate metaphor is that it dismisses any kind of division or duality. The object is nothing but clay. Clay in the form of a pot. In the same way, a pot vritti is nothing but consciousness. Consciousness associated with the name and form, which we call it a pot. There are very advanced texts in Vedas. They say that consciousness gets shaped or conditioned by Naam and Roop. They use the term conditioned consciousness. And in Sanskrit, it's called Avachin Chaitanya. When you study some of the Upanishads, you will find this word. And it's significant that our rishis, they developed a rich and highly nuanced vocabulary of words for consciousness. Not to confuse us, but to clarify it for us. You might be familiar with like Eskimos. They have 100 words for different kinds of snow. We all know that each kind of snow is nothing but water, H2O. And each kind of consciousness, conditioned consciousness, witness consciousness, reflected consciousness, etc. All these are the very same consciousness, but from different perspectives. How do we really know if consciousness is unchanging or not? Because consciousness certainly seems to change. For example, when we first wake up in the morning, you might feel a little dull. After a shower or a cup of coffee or tea, your consciousness seems to shine more brightly. But in fact, the dullness and the brightness you experience are both known to you because of your true self, Atma, which is unchanging. That is an unchanging consciousness that reveals them both. That I'm feeling dull, I'm feeling bright. Because all these changing conditions are the conditions of the mind. Many experiences can mislead you by producing an illusion of change or movement. For example, when you watch the sun go down in the evening, is sun really going down? Only thing which is happening is that our earth slowly turns on its axis, and we think the sun is going down. There's another example the Vedic rishis give, because those rishis, they lived on the bank of the rivers or the lakes. They used the boats to go across. If you're sitting on a boat, drifting very slowly down a tranquil stream, and when you look towards the shore, the trees seem to be slowly moving upstream somehow. Trees are not moving, you are moving. This illusion occurs when you fail to perceive that the boat is moving. So this example describes how sadness can slowly creep into your mind and creates the illusion that consciousness is gradually becoming sad. But like the evening sun and the trees on the shoreline remain completely stationary in spite of their apparent movement, in the same way, unchanging consciousness remains completely unaffected when sadness arises in your mind. What is Sakshi? English translation for Sakshi is witness consciousness. When a vritti, like a thought, emotion, or perception arises in your mind and you become aware of it, consciousness is said to be the observer or witness of the vritti, the Sakshi. Okay, so who is the Sakshi? The consciousness. By definition, a witness is an unobserved or uninvolved observer. That's a witness. Because if you merely observe a crime being committed, then you're said to be a witness. You're not involved in it. You're not involved in the crime. All you are doing is watching it. You're a witness. But if you yourself are involved in the crime, then you are certainly not a passive witness. In this way, consciousness is a passive or detached observer. That's why it's called Sakshi. Sakshi of all the vrittis that arise in the mind. So vrittis are arising in the mind, not in the consciousness. So these vrittis are observed without any action or effort whatsoever. Now it's really important to understand that Sakshi, as the conscious observer, or you can call it a awareful witness of your vrittis, is not a particular state of consciousness. That's very confusing sometimes for us. Really speaking, consciousness itself can have no states at all, because it's an unchanging. It's a fundamental reality. There cannot be a different states. So this is a very common mistake we make when we think that consciousness has various states, like higher or lower consciousness, or even when we say the waking, dream, and sleep consciousness. In each of these cases, it's actually your mind that shifts from one state to another, not unchanging consciousness. And what is a reflected consciousness? In Sanskrit, it's called Pratibimb Chaitanya or Chid Abhas. These are very complicated expressions, but they mean consciousness reflected by the mind. Reflected consciousness is simply a technical term used to denote experience, ordinary day-to-day experience. And this term is based on a metaphor in which consciousness is said to be reflected by your mind like a sunlight reflected by a bucket of water. The bucket represents your body. The water inside it represents your mind. And sunlight represents the consciousness. When the sun is reflected in the water, its image is shaped or conditioned by ripples on the surface of the water. We have seen that when it reflects on the ocean, we see the ripples, we see the waves, reflection of the ocean. Those ripples represent the constantly changing vrittis in your mind. So vrittis are like mental ripples, so to speak, that shape or condition the consciousness reflected by your mind. And the experiences occur when consciousness is reflected by your mind and conditioned by the vrittis. These vrittis are responsible for everything you experience. That's why Rishi Patanjali, when he defined yoga for us, he said, Yoga's chit vritti nirodha. Those are the vrittis you need to restrain, control, calm, if you want to see yourself. Even though consciousness itself is unchanging, it gets conditioned or shaped into various forms by your vrittis, into forms like happiness and sadness, forms like image of me right now on the screen, or of a pot, which we talked about earlier, or into other forms like thoughts and memories. Experience is simply a form of consciousness, like a pot is a form of clay. This bucket metaphor is also used to illustrate another important teachings of the ancient rishis. They said that even though there are many conscious beings, there's only one consciousness, one Atma, one eternal, unchanging, fundamental reality. That limitless, all-pervasive consciousness is simultaneously reflected by countless minds. Just like one sun simultaneously reflected by many buckets of water or many bodies of water. They can have all different shapes, different sizes, but sun is one. That means the very same consciousness is reflected right now in your mind and in my mind. So there's no such thing as your consciousness or my consciousness. There's only one uncreated, all-pervasive consciousness. One Atma, the self of all, the inner divinity of every being. That's how Lord Krishna showed Arjuna that this light, this divinity, there's no beginning, no end, no middle, everywhere. And then he showed him in everybody also the same consciousness, the same divinity. So by going through these examples and by going through these different terms which we often use, but remember that fundamental of this, then it gets very easy to understand the metaphors also, or when we are studying different scriptures, what these terms really mean. So that was the main reason for today's talk. Because often, in sense, if you know the Sanskrit, it's easier to understand. But when we translate into another language, it just gets a little confusing. So as students, we should try to understand it properly. Let's stop it here. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Visheshyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you very much.